Welcome to Grow Your Wealth, the podcast where scaling a successful brand and your wellness go hand in hand. I'm Rena Goodwin, founder and CEO of Factor PR, a top beauty, health, and wellness PR studio, and I'm here to help you work smarter, not harder. Each week, we'll talk branding, marketing, and business growth alongside real, practical insights from trailblazers who are building businesses without the burnout. If you're ready to grow your brand, protect your energy, and design a life you love, you are in the right place. Let's grow. Nobody enjoys thinking about death or disability, but today we're going there. Let's talk about the plan you hope you'll never need, or at least not anytime soon. A plan for what happens to your business if something happens to you or if you pass away unexpectedly. In this episode of Grow Your Wealth, I'm joined by estate planning attorney Benjamin Turshen of Solace Estate Planning to have a conversation that every founder, parent, and partner needs to hear. What happens to your business, your assets, and your loved ones if life does not go as planned? After his own life-threatening wake-up call, Benjamin shares his turning point that shifted him from a high-powered legal career in asset management to helping people create peace of mind through intentional estate and business succession planning. We dive into the real reasons people avoid this kind of planning and how it's not just about death. It's about protecting everything you're working so hard to build while you're still here. Ben makes it really fun too. This episode will challenge you in a good way to stop procrastinating, start communicating, and make sure your business, your family, and your legacy are protected no matter what. Here's Ben. Benjamin Turshen, welcome to the Grow Your Wealth podcast. How's it going?
It's going great. So happy to be here. I know we haven't really connected in a long time, but when I got your invite, I was just so excited to sit down and talk to you about all this.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely can't wait. Thank you for accepting that invitation. It's definitely been a long time and it is so great to see you. I'm very excited to catch up. Before we dive in, Mr. Ben, you are one cool lawyer. Can you share what first drew you to law, specifically estate planning, which is in your now? Would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Sure. So I started practicing law in 2008 in New York City, where I'm originally from. I live in Shaker Heights, Ohio, now going on 8 years. But back then I was a junior attorney, a massive law firm, international law firm, so big law. And I was doing asset management, which meant, I was putting together investment products for institutional sponsors, institutional investors. And that's really how I started my career, where I spent most of my career doing asset management for these large law firms with these, massive clients, multi-billion-dollar funds. And when I look back at my fund record, it's over $60 billion in investments that I was either part of the investor side or part of the fund formation side. And so that really didn't have all that much to do with estate planning. And I had a personal experience that you had some close proximity to, because you were really in our lives at that time, that really kind of woke me up to the dire necessity for estate planning. And so we got to go back 7 years now. In 2019, the year after we moved here, I used to do something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so I went to Jiu-Jitsu practice one morning. I'm in the locker room and it was January 7th. So it was my first, training session back with my buddies and with my coach after the holidays, and we're all catching up, and I started to feel dizzy. And the next thing I know, I'm flat on my back looking up at the lights, and my coach was kneeling over me and saying, "Hey, do you know who I am? Do you know where you are?" And I did not know what happened. And what happened was I actually suffered sudden cardiac arrest, not a heart attack, but sudden cardiac arrest. So my heart just stopped and I stopped breathing and I was unconscious for a few minutes, and he did CPR on me. I was able to come back, which there was no AED. There's no external defibrillator at the facility at that time. There is now. I was the inspiration for that. And as far as I know, they haven't had to use it. Thank goodness. So, this was really completely unexpected for me. I was 37 years old at the time. I had no history of this. I'd always been an athlete. I always ate really well, took really good care of myself. And so this was, completely out of the blue. And, fortunately we'd moved to Cleveland. I was getting treated at the best cardiology hospital in the world. So I felt like I was in good hands, optimistic. And at the same time, my family was actually excited for other reasons, because my wife was expecting at the time. Our daughter had just turned 3 years old, and we were expecting a second child. And just a few weeks after my event, before they even really knew what was going on with me, Caitlin, my wife, woke up one morning and was in intense pain, bleeding. And she's like, something's wrong. We need to go to the hospital. And she had emergency surgery for this ectopic pregnancy that was causing life-threatening internal bleeding. And, they surgeon comes out of surgery. It's her OBGYN who delivered my son 2 years ago. Wonderful guy. And he said, always listen to your wife. I said, what happened? He's like, yeah, something was wrong. Like this would have been catastrophic had this progressed any longer than we, before we intervened. And so in that moment, it really hit me in those couple of weeks that I'd failed my family. And I'll tell you why. Because we had no planning in place, like many young families. We just thought, hey, we're healthy, we're young, we'll get to this at some point. Nothing bad is going to happen. And I should have known better. I was an attorney. I went to law school. I took wills, trusts, and estates. But beyond that, that wasn't what my original practice was. But beyond that, when I first got married, my parents were like, hey, you guys got to get, they sent me to their lawyer and we didn't do it. My in-laws were always like, did you get this done? We had a financial planner. Every time we met with them, did you get this done? Our accountant, same thing. Did you get this done? So all these people kind of pushing us, and, like so many people that I encounter, we just said, we'll get to it. We procrastinated. We waited. It's something at the time that, neither one of us wanted to think about, let alone talk about. I mean, now I love talking about it, but because I feel like the more people know about this, the better the informed they are to make decisions and to really get a great plan in place that's going to protect their business, protect their assets, protect their family. But at the time, again, I felt like I completely failed my family. And this is the inspiration that this really caused me to pivot my law practice and decide, I'm going to go from asset management to what I do now, which is asset protection, and helping families to make sure that, if something happens, like happened to us, I mean, really within a matter of weeks, that, the worst possible scenario, I mean, for us, it would have been, I mean, I think about my daughter, what would that look like? I'll tell you what it looks like. Child Protective Services, guardianship proceedings, possibly foster care. I mean, this is, till it's all said and done. And this is just her. I mean, forget the stuff. I mean, this is the really important piece is, a 3-year-old having to, go through all of that after losing her parents. I mean, it's just unimaginable. But that was, the precipice that we came very close to falling over. And that was it. That opened my eyes. And I said, if I can help one family avoid that near catastrophe that we avoided. And, it's hard for me to talk about this stuff, but I talk about it all the time. Literally, I tell my story constantly, because if people can get that vicarious wake up call through me, then to get some planning done, then, it's worth the little bit of, repeated trauma in my mind of these events that can inspire somebody. So we went through it. I mean, again, it could have been much, much worse. And I've seen families go through worse, unfortunately. But again, it's always better if you can kind of get that vicarious experience through someone else. And I ask people all the time, how long you've been thinking about this? And people always tell me, oh, forever, years, decades. We've been thinking about it. And I said, well, how come we're having this conversation now? And typically it's they didn't hear my story, but they, something happened to a relative or a close friend, and either it didn't work out well, or it actually, they had the planning in place, and they go, you know what, we know that they did this and we want to do this too, just in case. I mean, I had this conversation yesterday with someone, and I said, how was that for your friend's family? He lost a friend fairly young. And they said, actually, outside of the grieving of losing that loved one, just the legalities of what needs to go on, they said they were well organized. They had a great plan in place. It worked great. And that's why we're here. We want to make sure that if something happens to us, the whole process is as easy and as efficient and as beneficial to their loved ones as it possibly can be. So, that's how I came to this.
Thank you for sharing that story. That definitely took me back because I remember at the time just how especially surprised everyone was with first your medical emergency, right? And then Kate there soon after. You use the word wake up call so perfectly, right? Because you just never know. And especially with those of us that have responsibilities, whether it's children, businesses, both, we don't want to wait for that wake up call. Yet because of all of these responsibilities, I think a lot of people tend to postpone, right? Working
Absolutely.
on their estates. So we're going to talk more about all of this here in just a second. But first, I would love for you, Ben, if you wouldn't mind helping us define what do you mean by asset protection? And if you can kind of double tap on like, why is this so important, right? Because some people may think like, well, if the worst happens or like, I'm dead, who cares? Why is that not the right frame of mind here?
Sure. And I encounter a lot of people who have that mindset initially, and then when they realize, estate planning is not for just when you die.
Mhm.
And they tend to kind of turn the page. But I just want to say for anyone listening, you know, I'm fine. I had surgery to correct this congenital heart condition that caused the cardiac arrest. It's been 7 years. My wife is totally fine. We ended up having a son. He's turning 2 at the end of the month. So it's a happy ending for us, and we have our planning in place. Of course, it's a happy ending for us. But what is asset protection? What are you protecting your assets from? There's a couple of big things. First is, again, let's start off with the beginning of the timeline. During your life, disability, something could happen to you. Again, what happened to me, I was fortunate, with that CPR, there was no cognitive impact, but let's say I stayed unconscious instead of, what it was like, probably anywhere from like, the guy who was working on me, it was such a wild experience for him. He doesn't know, he wasn't looking at a clock, but he said, probably, 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes. But, after that 4 minutes, I mean, there's permanent damage that can take place. And, so let's say what happened to me, maybe it took them, for the ambulance to come and put the pads on me. And, I'd suffered some permanent disability where I can't make legal and financial decisions. What does that look like for your family? Well, they have to bring a lawsuit against you. You're the alleged incapacitated person. This is called guardianship in Ohio, where they have to actually gain guardianship over those assets if there's no planning in place. And so what that means is anything that's in your name where they can't control it other than going to court, guess what? It's frozen till you go to court. They have to get a lawyer. You have to get a lawyer. The court appoints a lawyer for you to represent. It's a lawsuit. And the big danger is it's up to the court who they decide is going to be the guardian of your assets. It's not up to your family. They don't get to choose. And so, people can come out of the woodwork and become party to the lawsuit, and they could end up as guardian of your estate, of your assets. So that's a huge danger that we want to avoid. Massive. And so, that's really the issue while you're alive. You mentioned, hey, I'm dead, I don't care. But, while you're alive, there's some huge risks. And anytime you go to court, that's public record. And so, I always tell people, hey, especially homeowners, how many phone calls do you get a week about people wanting to buy your house? Right. Because your house is recorded in your name and they can look that stuff up. But, imagine everything, all your assets, all these people, this court record, all your family members getting harassed now. And, now it's just annoying when you get those phone calls, but because, you're alive and well and you're dealing with, the daily stresses of getting through life. But, imagine having a loved one that goes through, that's disabled. They can't make legal and financial decisions, or a loved one who passes. And now the family is adjusting all those expectations, whether it's, they're grieving at some level, even if you're here, because you're not the same anymore. And now, they're getting harassed and they're getting scammed. And, we see this all the time, and it's something that's very easily preventable, but, it is these lifetime risks. The other big two risks that you face during your lifetime are lawsuits. And people say, well, I'm not going to get sued, or I have an umbrella policy, or whatever it is. Go look up how many civil lawsuits there are. And, one of the roles that I kind of hate the most about what I do is this idea that like I'm a fear monger. But again, it's the wake up calls and the realities. And if you can do that vicariously without actually having to go through it, all the better. But, I tell people, I'm like, hey, listen, you drive a car? Yeah. Okay. You're one car ride away from losing everything in a lawsuit. And that's just the truth. I mean, motor vehicle accidents are a leading cause of death. I mean, I won't say it's inevitable, but the statistics don't lie. I mean, it's part of the reality that we live in. And so, and people say, well, I have insurance. And I said, how many times have you had an insurance company not want to pay a claim? Do you want to leave that at risk? We can put in legal structures that actually protect you no matter what. And so that's another big risk, is lawsuits. The other big risk that people face later in life, for the most part, although it can happen earlier, are long-term care costs. This is something that people don't think about often, but long-term care costs, the average cost of long-term care in Ohio for a private room in a nursing home exceeds $10,000 now. So, typically people are paying 12, 15,000, maybe more a month. This is the monthly fee. So, over time that can really draw down on that generational wealth. I have a client whose mother has been in a nursing home 16 years, private paying. I mean, it's millions of dollars at this point.
Wow.
And so, when we look at the state of the world, people used to think, decades ago, generations ago, you end up in a nursing home. It's 1, 2, maybe 3 years you're there. But, the state of modern medicine, our lifespans are much longer. Not necessarily what some people call our health span, which is, being healthy, being able to do all the things that you want to do, but we're staying alive a lot longer. And people are ending up needing long-term care. There was a study done where, if you reach the age of 65, there's 2/3 of people will end up in a long-term care facility. And out of those 2/3, 20% of them will be there for over 5 years. So it is for most people an inevitability, and something that we should absolutely plan for.
Absolutely. So kind of what I'm also hearing from you too, Ben, is that if we don't make these decisions while we're alive and well and work with a lawyer to make sure that these are documented and enforceable by the law, someone else will make these decisions for us.
Absolutely. I mean, people say, well, I have no plan. I'm like, guess what? Everyone has a plan. If you don't create it, guess who creates it? State of Ohio. which is the rule book that ends up governing what happens in most people's lives. And it's really not the result that most people want. And so, you can, the thing that nearly all my clients tell me is what they want to do is maintain control. They want to maintain control. And without the planning, you let go of that control. So it's something that you can absolutely maintain with the right planning. But if you don't have it, guess what? There's rules for you. It's not what you think is going to happen. It's what the state of Ohio, the rules say, and what the judges will decide. And so, you leave it up in the air and out in the public too.
Definitely.
So you lose all your privacy.
I've always thought PR and law have had so much in common, right? It just in terms of, my job as a PR person for my clients too, is to often think about worst case scenario and work backwards from that to obviously avoid it, but to build out that plan as well too. And not just exclusive to PR, but for especially business owners, there's oftentimes worst case scenario plans, but for a lot of especially emerging entrepreneurs, businesses that really rely on the owner, right? Or maybe an operator, or maybe it's a person who's wearing two hats. That I feel like could be very, very dangerous to not have kind of this succession plan. Is that something that you also work on with your clients? Is that folded into what an estate plan looks like?
Absolutely. So a business is an asset, and it's if you're the business owner, it's actually a personal asset. And so, business owners tend to think, okay, I did an LLC, I have business insurance, I'm protected. And you're protected from what I call the inside out. So if you think about that LLC, that legal structure as a bubble, the bubble protects what's in the bubble if you manage it correctly. So, if you commingle assets and other things that we can discuss at more length, then that bubble might not even work for you. But if you get sued personally, that bubble is exposed because it's a personal asset. So, what we do is we take those bubbles and we put them in boxes to protect them, and the boxes are a trust. And so that way, if you get sued personally, your business asset is protected. And I'll give them, my wife has 2 retail stores, and they have inventory, hundreds of thousands of dollars of inventory, and, the stores and the leases and, other assets. It's not just like a pure service business where you might have, a laptop.
Yeah.
And so, we want to protect those assets, not just from the inside out, but from the outside in, so that they're protected. If you get sued personally, you don't lose the business. Most people think, well, if the business gets sued, I don't want to lose my house. And if you have the LLC and it's structured correctly and you maintain it correctly, sure, there's that inherent protection there of the LLC. And that's why people create them. And that's why people get business insurance, so they don't lose their personal assets. But that's a personal asset that you can lose. But beyond that, what you mentioned, business owners where, the owner operator is really the keystone of the business, and the business doesn't function without them. We need to start planning for that too. And so what I recommend to business owners, and this has 2 benefits, by the way. The first is for succession planning, and really, why they come to me too. If something happens to me, I want to make sure that the business is protected, that the business can continue, that the right people can come in legally and take charge of the business. But then there's all those operational aspects. And so I encourage my clients, if the business relies on you and you don't have a replacement who knows exactly what you do at all times, all the things you do, then you need to start creating those SOPs, those standard operating procedures, and document what you do. And so there's a twofold benefit of this. One is, let's say something happens to you and you have the legal structures in place that someone can come in. It's like my wife's, I don't know how to run my wife's stores. But legally I can. Legally I can because of how we set those up. So legally I can come in to do that. So I won't have that opposition in place, but I just don't know how to do it. So we need to create those standard operating procedures so someone can come in and really follow a set of instructions and be able to, keep the train on the tracks and keep the whole thing moving. So that I encourage my clients, if you haven't done that, do that. But there's a second benefit to this too, which is huge from a business side, is if you create all those standard operating procedures, you become irrelevant, because guess what? You can hire someone to do what you do. And now you can duplicate, and now you can scale. Where if it all relies on you, and you have someone who can step in for your role, and really all the roles, because, the larger a business gets, there's multiple roles. And, there are things that, I have a funding specialist who does all the funding for our trusts, and she does things, and I do know what she does, so I can step in and do her role. But, bigger businesses, there's some people who specialize in other things. And so everybody, again, if you want to scale, you need to be able to have those systems in place and those standard operating procedures. So, if one person quits, one person retires, one person leaves for whatever reason, you fire them, someone else can just kind of drop right in and get trained up really quickly to be able to replace that person, or maybe not even replace that person. Hey, we want to open another store. We want to just keep growing, and you can fill more roles. So it's essential for the estate planning side, but it's also essential from a growth perspective for business looking to scale.
I love that you say this. This is so, so important. Couple of things, because I think
Sure.
this is so important for people to understand too. I look at someone like my dad, God bless him. He's 75. He's still working. He owns a restaurant. Nobody knows how to open the store. Nobody knows how to run place food orders, all of these things. Right. And he's like, nothing's going to happen to me. Everything is fine. Oh my God, stresses me out, as his eldest daughter. Right. And so I actually look at that as an example for someone like me, also an entrepreneur that runs a business as well. thinking about worst case scenarios. If something happens to me, who's going to kind of step in, right? And so that's been something that I've been working on. Actually, my goal for 2026 is to make my business Factor PR sellable. I'm not selling it, but in order to have a business that is able to be sold, it has to run without the owner, right? It has to be able to do that exclusively. But exactly as what you said, Ben, it also opens up this portal to be able to actually be the owner of your business, not necessarily the operator. I always like to say I like to be nose in, but hands out. Like I don't want to run the business.
Yeah, working on the business, not working in the business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hi, friends. I want to tell you about our new and improved authority accelerator from Factor PR called RealFluence. RealFluence is the only membership that helps beauty and wellness founders grow their reputation and authority to attract new customers without endless discounting, advertising, or going viral. Inside, you'll learn how to get recognized for your product or your expertise, partner with other founders, and become the name people trust and talk about, all with the guidance and community to support you every step of the way. Remember, you can't buy authority, you have to earn it, and RealFluence is here to help. Visit therealfluence.com to get started. So, that's something that I know keeps up so many founders at night is like whether it is a service-based business or something where, you are still providing a service, even if you sell packaged goods, right?
Sure.
It's like so many business owners just keep it all in their heads and they say, one day I'll get to it. One day I'll get to it. That being said, I have documented everybody's role except for mine, which is arguably the most important role, right? And so I've actually, I'm finally after 10 years getting an executive assistant. And that's one of the things she's going to help me with is executive leadership type SOPs so that, again, who knows what could happen in the future, but at least that peace of mind. And I think that that is probably one of the most, you had actually mentioned exactly those words before we hopped on the call, just how valuable that is, right? Like, would you argue that even with just that peace of mind, even if nothing happens, you never want to tap into your estate plan or call up Ben because something terrible has happened, just having that peace of mind? Do you also find with your clients that like that also helps with things like executive function, business scaling, growth, etc., because they've just kind of gotten these like very important legal and logistical ducks in a row?
Absolutely. And before I talk on this, we all see this. We all see our favorite restaurants close, our favorite stores close because, something happened to the owner.
So true.
And, again, if you can benefit from those those experiences vicariously, all the better, all the better. Again, I mean, I know it worries you with your father, like, hey, what's going to happen to the restaurant? And so, we do see this in the community all the time. But in terms of that peace of mind, I mean, I named my law firm Solace Estate Planning because solace is that comfort that you get in these hard, unfortunate situations that are inevitable. And with estate planning, you said, we hope we never need our estate plan. Eventually, you're going to need it. I mean, everyone, there is a lifespan for everyone. And so, eventually it's there. It's something that is really essential. It's unavoidable. Mm-hmm. But, while you don't have it done and looking at, what might happen, we talked about guardianship, losing everything in a lawsuit. I mean, that all happens during life. Long-term care costs, that always happens during life. But after you pass, there's this probate process that people really are completely misguided on. The number one thing that I hear from people is, hey, we have a will, we're all set. And a will guarantees that you're going to end up in probate. In fact, the way I was taught this back in law school was my professor said, think of the will as a letter to the probate judge saying, instead of applying the state's default rules, if I don't have anything, apply this will, but it has to go through probate. And for people who haven't been through that with a parent or a loved one, again, public record, incredibly expensive, anywhere from, 5 to 20% of the estate gets spent in probate costs. It's long. So it takes typically at least 9 months, sometimes, into a year or multiple years if there's complications. During that time, those assets are all frozen, and your family has to take, you're hiring attorneys to do that, but they're part of that process. And so, I always ask people, I said, listen, tell me about your kids. And they tell, oh, our kids, they live out of state, or they married, do they work yet? Probate would be a massive disruption on their lives. And so again, we're thinking about all these things that might happen. And what does that do? That weighs on us, that keeps us up at night. Mm. And so when you get your planning in place, when you know that when these inevitabilities end up happening, that there's a plan, the plan is going to work. Mm-hmm. And it's going to make what would otherwise be, a very expensive, very time consuming, very public process, private and efficient. It's a relief. It's a huge relief. And then we can, when we have that relief, and it's not this kind of background worry that we're just kind of trying to avoid or pushing off, we'll deal with this later when we're less busy. Guess what? You're not going to be less busy. You get that relief. And then really, what does that allow you to do? It allows you to be more present. It's not eating up that bandwidth in the back. That's all solved. That's all. So, you're more present, you're more aware, you're more focused. Whether that be when you're with your family or whether that be while you're in your business, there's not that worry there hanging over your head. So it does give you that peace of mind. And for really everybody, I mean, that is, that's the most valuable thing. And you mentioned before, why do I care about this? I'm going to be dead. And, again, when I emphasize to people, well, this matters during your life, they go, oh, okay. I don't want someone to be in control that I don't know or don't trust, and end up, spending my money on things that they shouldn't, or putting me in a place where I don't want to be, or whatever that is. But even that, most of my clients don't fall into that category. Most of my clients are people who have these really deep, caring relationships for their family members and want to make sure that this is, this is the easiest possible way and most efficient possible way for them to get through the legal process of transferring authority and control and ownership of your assets, and making sure your wishes are taken care of. I mean, there's a whole side of this that's non-financial. Someone there to make your healthcare decisions, your end of life decisions, even some non-legal aspects of documenting what you want if you can't express what you want anymore. People end up, I think about my grandma, who just turned 97 at the end of January this year. And up until last summer, she lived independently in an apartment right up the street from my parents. My dad took really great care of her, but he wasn't a full-time caregiver. And eventually she needed that. And, she can't express what she likes in the same way. And as long as I've known my grandma likes to do a few things. She liked to knit, she liked to play cards, she liked to watch TV. And so, when you get into a care facility and they got you going to art class, or they got you going to Zumba, or they got you up there dancing, and these aren't things that were enjoyable or comfortable for you when you could say that, now you're doing it. And, you can't express that this isn't what you don't like, but you don't like it. It affects your daily experience. And so, if we can, again, it's just like the business owner, if we can document those SOPs, right? Those preferences, how things are done, how you like things, it just improves the whole process for you.
I love that. And something that keeps running kind of through my head too, Ben, as you're talking about just like the critical importance of all of this as well too, is that for those that are maybe avoiding or postponing their event planning now, I admit I have done this as well too. It's the discomfort of it. It's just having these hard conversations, and it feels very uncomfortable. But what I'm hearing as well, or absorbing from this conversation, is that you can be either uncomfortable now talking about it, or very, very uncomfortable later if you don't have this plan. And I think everyone would argue they would rather take a hard conversation over a hard life or a hard end of life too. So I just want to also commend you for that, because I know you have mentioned that, you've got this knack too for making it a little bit more as enjoyable as it can be, so to speak too, which is important.
Yeah. I mean, I get to know my clients at a more intimate level than even most of their family members know them. Mm. And in that process, we make a connection that you don't have elsewhere. And I think, I'll just give you an example. I'm actually meeting with this couple later this afternoon, and we were going through the initial plan design, and we're putting together, and I do this first because it's like the most fun part, right? We're doing the personal care plan. I'm learning, hey, what foods do you like? What do you like to watch on TV? What don't you like to watch on TV? Do you drink? What do you like to drink? How often do you want to be served? Do you like to go outside? Do you want to go to the movies? Do you want to go to sporting events? Do you want to go to the theater?
Wow.
And what books do you read? Who are your favorite authors? All these things, tons of questions.
Yeah.
And I really get to know them, and we have a really, I always enjoy it. This is somewhat common. I won't say this is universal, but sometimes with couples, one couple's really kind of driving this. It's important to them. The other couple is a little bit more avoidant. They don't want to deal with this. And so this couple in particular, it was the wife who, came to me through a friend referral, and her husband came along, and really in the first meeting, he's like, I don't even know why I'm here. She said we should do this. So I'm here. Let's do it. And at the end of our last meeting, we got up to leave, and he shook my hand. He's like, I want to tell you something. He goes, I had a really good time this afternoon. And I said, me too. And he said, I was not expecting this to be like this at all. And so, people have this idea that, estate planning is this transactional thing. Get the documents done, set it and forget it. That's it. And for a lot of people, that is what they do. And that's one way. And it's just like, you can go to one restaurant, have one experience, go to another restaurant, have another experience. And the experience that I create for my clients is a relationship. It's not a transaction. Part of the way I approach this is, and we can talk about this a little bit more, but the estate planning, the way I do estate planning with my clients is not set it and forget it.
Mm-hmm.
We create a plan, but then we have to maintain the plan because life changes all the time. The relationships change, people's health changes, the assets changes, the law changes. And so, I do a lot of planning for people who already have plans, but they didn't look at this plan for, however many years. And now the attorney that they went to is either retired or they didn't like them or whatever. And now they're coming to me to update the plan. And so all my clients, we keep the plans updated. We stay in regular communication and contact. So the relationship's really important. And the relationship's so important as well because these are difficult conversations. And so, I think about something else unrelated to estate planning, right? It's, and this is, I just want to be clear. I'm not a couples therapist. I deal with couples every day. I'm not a couples therapist, but when people go to couples therapy, why is that? Because they're having a hard time communicating and they're having a hard time understanding each other. And so with estate planning, again, I'm taking something that people don't like to think about, don't like to talk about, and we're able to do it in a way that's very thorough and efficient, but also in a way that's enjoyable. And so we gotta, I mean, in my view, I gotta have fun with this. Otherwise, it's just doom and gloom. And I wouldn't be doing it otherwise if I wasn't helping, put smiles on people's faces. My clients always, we're in an age now where people do ask permission, but they're like, can I give you a hug? I mean, I don't offer the hugs, but if they want to hug me, I'll give them a hug. But again, it's the experience that makes all the difference. And so if you're thinking, hey, I don't want to deal with this, if you get some help dealing with it, if you have a partner in your attorney to help you and guide you and have these discussions that you otherwise don't want to have because you don't know how to discuss it. I mean, they're hard, there are so many hard, difficult topics. I mean, I'll just give you one for younger people. Who do you want to be the guardian of your kids?
Yeah.
I mean, and this is, and parents go back and forth and there's all these, because you got two families coming together. So who's it going to be? Well, guess what? It doesn't necessarily need to be a family member of either family. You get to choose. And so, and again, oftentimes it is a family member but having these conversations and having them with a third party in the room to say, hey, he said this. Are you on the same page with this? Does this make sense to you? I know that you guys have had trouble discussing this. And then, so, you're representing both sides. You're all together. You're all on the same team. But instead of just, two people kind of going to battle, to have that mediator there to help facilitate the conversation makes all the difference.
Oh my gosh, totally. Just kind of to recap too, right? Like, especially for those of us, certainly if you have children, if you have a business, right? So many of us, we've got the insurance, we have the LLC, S Corp, whatever it is. We've got a financial advisor, accounting, estate planning. Do not forget the estate planning. Is there anybody else that you would suggest, or anyone else that you kind of work with in your orbit too, that should be part of this conversation, particularly when it comes to asset protection around your business?
So when I represent individual or, a business owner, I feel like estate planning is a team sport. So, I make contact, I have those relationships with their financial planner, with their tax planner, to make sure that everyone's on the same page. It's just like anything else. I mean, if you just, if you're on the team and you're doing your own thing, it doesn't help the team. So, we all need to be on the same page. I need to have that relationship with those people where, we're all your advocates. We're all on your team. We all want this to work out for you, but we need to make sure that we're all doing something, moving in the same direction, so that the financial planner is not going one way and I'm going the other way. And, the tax professionals going in the third direction. And then, that's really important. Those are people who need to be there. I mean, the other thing I will say that I think is important, that I think a lot of people who come into my office who've worked with other attorneys, they don't get this guidance necessarily, at least from what I see, is when you create these financial documents that give someone else authority in certain situations, whether it be a healthcare proxy or healthcare power of attorney, or a financial power of attorney for property, or a trust or a will where you have a trustee or you have an executor. These fiduciary positions, when you create these in documents, guess what? Those are nominations. You're nominating people into these roles. And the way I like to explain it, it's like, think about the batting order, right? I'm not a baseball person myself, but, I know enough about baseball. I've watched enough about baseball to know that, hey, the first person gets up there and either they get on base or they're out. And then the next person goes and they get on base or they're out. And the next person goes and they get on base and they're out. And you go through the batting order. And the same way, you have these people named in succession. So someone can take over but I just want to be clear. That's not a legal obligation. They might have a moral or an ethical responsibility because they're a family member or close friend to step in for you. And there's compensation for these people in certain roles. So there might be some financial incentive to do that as well. And there's certainly, once they accept those rules, there's legal obligations at that point, but it's a nomination. They don't have to accept that role at all. And so, you want to have those conversations with those people. And what we do is we actually train those fiduciaries so they understand those roles. So when they get into them, they know what to do. But you want to have those conversations with those people. So those are people you want to bring in too. I mean, you want to bring in, listen, when I do estate planning for older individuals and they have adult children, the adult children are typically part of the discussion. But again, it's so important those fiduciaries know, because they can say no. And, sometimes people say, hey, I just want to put this person down. Like, who's their backup? And we don't have to have infinite backups. I mean, there's enough is enough at a certain point. But, and by the way, if you have a trust, let's say your trust won't fail for lack of trustee. The court system is there to protect you in the inevitable. Just because you have a trust doesn't mean you can't utilize the court. So your beneficiaries can come and the court can assign a trustee so that the trust doesn't fail because you don't have a trustee. But again, wouldn't you want the control? Wouldn't you want to be able to choose that person? But the important thing is, have these discussions with the people either before you put them in the documents or shortly thereafter. I mean, we can always change the documents, but, I'll give you an example. I found out that a close friend of mine who named me as a trustee didn't ask me. And I found out through, I was searching some public records and I found there's a document in Ohio. When you put real estate into a trust, you have to do a memorandum of trust, naming the trustees. It's similar to a trust certificate. Again, I'm giving you guys some details that you don't need to necessarily know, but guess what? In the public record, I saw my name as successor trustee, and I called them up. I said, hey, when were you going to ask me about this? And they said, well, this is what you do. We thought you'd be the best person. I go, yeah, of course. But, you weren't going to tell me? And they said, oh, yeah, well, they said, our attorney didn't say we had to tell anybody. And again, you don't have to, it's a nomination. But wouldn't it be better to know than to be caught off guard? Because then at least you're prepared. I see problems with estate plans when all the parties involved either are in the dark about it, don't have the training of what to do, so they make critical errors. So yeah, it is a group effort. As they say with all things, it takes a village. But yeah, those are important. Those are people that you want to talk to for sure. And again, if you have an estate planner who really takes their time with you, gets to know you, get to know the relationships, who's important to you, what those relationships are, what they look like, and you get that guidance, and then your estate planning attorney should tell you, hey, go talk to those people and make sure they're okay with it. And there's ways to ask too. Listen, I coach my clients on how to have those conversations. Give the people the out right away. Say, listen, and tell them where they are. You don't have to tell them necessarily where they are on the batting order, but sometimes it takes a little pressure off people if you say, hey, listen, you're a dear friend. I love you. You're smart. You're well organized. And we just we're putting together our estate plan, and we have a trustee in place if something happens to us, but we'd love if you would want to be the backup for us. And please, by all means, if this is at all, overstepping, or you don't want to do it for whatever reason, please tell me now. I'm not going to be upset. This isn't going to change our relationship. I don't want to impose on you. I mean, all these things that give them the out right now. And I have to tell you, especially those conversations, what they tend to do for people is actually bring them together. It's amazing. Someone asks you to be your successor trustee, or someone asks you to be the guardian of their kids. I mean, these are like, there's tears in these conversations, and good tears, right? Because this is, that just strengthens the bond. But, gosh, something happens to you and you get a call and say, hey, you're the trustee in the trust. And you go, what? Wait a second. I don't know how to be a trustee. I didn't know anything about this. I got all this going on right now. Do I have to do it? And someone says no. And they go, okay, I'm not going to do it. And then, and so, it's a lot of things that people don't think about when they think about doing this, especially when they think estate planning is about a set of documents. It's not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, Ben, I feel like I could ask you 100 more questions, but you are also leaving us with such a treat today. You actually have a masterclass coming up. So if people want to learn more about estate planning and kind of just go a lot deeper into this conversation, can they tune into that? What are the details around that?
So the masterclass is on demand. It's a short video that's on my website. If you go to solaceestateplanning.com, you can click a link right up there to log in to watch that. And really what that does is it opens your eyes to some of the issues. I mean, if you've listened to this podcast, you've heard a lot of them, but in a very succinct way, it really kind of opens your eyes to some of these issues that we talked about today. And really the next step is to reach out. I'm licensed in New York and Ohio, and I have clients throughout both of those states. I have colleagues who approach estate planning in the same way that I do. So if you've had experience with other estate planning attorneys, and this sounds like this is a different experience that I want to have, I'm happy to put people in touch with people out of, other attorneys out of state who have the similar philosophy about estate planning, which is really kind of an asset protection side versus, hey, just, get the documents done. And, we'll make sure that, your estate plan really is about you and your voice and your values and your wishes. And that those are really expressed through the documents. Again, the documents by themselves may give some authority, but no direction, and really, make sure that it relates to, how you want things to go.
Wow. I love it. Talk about being like the CEO of your life and your afterlife, right?
Yeah.
That's so critically important. Benjamin Turshen, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for all of this incredibly, incredibly important information. And I look forward to helping getting it out there too.
Thank you, Rena. Yeah, I love being on. Really great to reconnect with you and your audience. And again, if I can be of any help, you can see the masterclass on the website. You can book a 15-minute call with me. There's no cost to that. And at least I can I can, hear where you're at and give you some guidance of, what you should do next, whether you're working with me or whether you're out of state and you need some help and you need a good referral, to make sure that you're in good hands. I'm happy to do that for anyone.
That is so generous. Thank you so much. And I'll have the link to that in the show notes below. Thanks, Ben.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode deposited some useful advice and insights to help you grow your wealth. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future conversations. You can find more resources, episode details, and updates at growyourwealthpodcast.com. And let's keep the conversation going on Instagram. Follow me at Grow Your Wealth Podcast. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or takeaway from today's show. Until next time, remember, burnout is optional. Take care, and I'll see you next week.